Good morning, good day, good evening, wherever you may be, in whatever state you find yourself. Yeah, you can see the coast to coast roots in my greeting. It's me again. Uh, I I was looking over the video that I posted previously this week about my testimony as far as my life experiences and stuff, and that was by no means exhaustive. There's a lot to fill in the gaps, but I tried to stick to the highlights for brevity's sake. And this morning, I kind of wanted to discuss the way I approach things and why I approach things that way. Now, of course, from an early age, it's like, given all of this literature, given all of this educational material, a desire to understand the world around me, I guess I've always been somewhat scientifically minded in that I want to understand how things work, why they work, what's going on. I mean, I guess that's pretty much the sum total of my intellectual pursuits in life. I just want to get it, I just want to get it. And so I don't know how. I mean, maybe some people are just more logical than others. Maybe some people are more subjective. Maybe some people don't have a problem with logical contradictions, but it seems like that's always been the root of understanding for me, is that things got to make sense. It's like, if it works in theory and I attempt to apply that theory and it doesn't work out according to plan, well, then either my theory must be wrong or my execution must be wrong. Something must have gone wrong. And, like I'd relayed that story about the pastor that was trying to saying darn it was just as bad as saying, damn it, or whatever, things like that. They trip this circuit breaker in my head that says something's not adding up here. Okay. In one sense, a word is being used to convey an extreme meaning. Rhetorically speaking, we'd call it an expletive, whereas another is trying to also convey an extreme meaning, but be sensitive to the sensibilities of the hearer. It's subtleties like that. I don't know where I got this from. I don't know why my mind works that way, but things need to make sense for me. If it doesn't make sense, it can't abide in my head. So that's just a bit of a background to the structure of my thinking. The law of contradiction has been intuitive to me for as far back as I can remember. The law of the excluded middle and the law of identity, both of those came later on through education, but even those, all three of them are intrinsic to one another anyway, so I guess if you think enough about it, you'd arrive at them one way or the other. But in my earliest recollections, now, mind you, you're going to have to indulge in a few presuppositions here. Philosophically, you'd call them axioms, I guess, though they're not really axiomatic. The reason I say they're presuppositions is because they're things that maybe you can call it the suspension of disbelief. You're just going to have to accept it in order to get where I'm going with this, okay? So in my mind, and yes, I'm drinking good old Budweiser today. No, I'm not. This is actually an old bottle. Drinking Natty Ice. Still got some of my homebrew left, but yeah, I'm going to go light today. That's some strong stuff. It makes me emotional. But anyway, I differentiate between this computer made of meat that resides in our skull and what is said to be me and what is said to be actual cognizance, understanding. I think that this structure here is built to interface with this particular expression of reality, and thus acts very similar to an adapter. And when I talk about my mind, I'm not speaking about the computations going on in this meat computer. I'm talking about what the Greeks would refer to as the nous. The nous, N-O-U-S, the nous is our mind apart from what we would normally call our mind. And the nous would be what's involved in near-death experiences, where there's zero consciousness being able to be registered in the brain. The nous would be soul think, I guess. I mean, I guess you could get complex and philosophical about it and use a bunch of million-dollar words, but if you really want to get down to the truth of it, it is our mind when we have no meat with which to work. And so I believe that a lot of our learning is actually remembering, or maybe not so much remembering, but translating what the nous has always known into a format that is able to be processed by this analog computer up here. So I say that by way of introduction to one of my very most audacious statements. I remember being in the womb. I have been saying this from very early days, and I've had people laugh at me and make fun of me. Other people pretend to entertain the notion in the back of their mind. It's like, no way. Because, I mean, look, I know biology. I know that neural pathways as far as tangible memories aren't really established until a year and a half, 2 years in the human brain. It's I guess the term would be neuroplasticity, where the brain is far too dynamic that early in life to build lasting connections that aren't regularly exercised. Children learn very quickly how to speak a language because they're constantly trying to speak and they're constantly hearing. They learn how to crawl and walk because they're constantly trying to do it. They're exercising those neural pathways. If a neural pathway is not constantly exercised, it gives way to new neural pathways. And thus, when it comes to experiential memories that we would almost call maybe anecdotal, would be a good word for it, those fall by the wayside because children are too involved in actually confronting life rather than dwelling on memories of the past, as boredom tends to elicit in us as we develop. But I myself very clearly can remember it. I always have, and that's always puzzled me. And as I've progressed in my years, I've sought to understand it better. I mean, I can remember warmth, rhythm, just being surrounded yet free. It's just the one thing. It's a very abstract experience to relay, but the one thing that really stands out in my mind is that the one thought that I had, the one inclination that I had, was just pondering my own existence. And of course, you know, these are memories without words. These are memories without language. It's mere knowing. And that's really what it came down to, is knowing that I exist, knowing that I am, and going from there. And one of the key elements to that was knowing that there was an other. Now, as we enter into this world, we find many, many others. Perhaps in the womb, we could conceive of our mother's voice and the emotions that we feel as being an other, a new experience. But for me, there was something different. From day one, there was always something different. And I mean, perhaps modern psychology would say that this would be a form of maybe a cross between dissociative disorder and schizophrenia or whatnot. But there was always this all-encompassing presence in the forefront of my cognizance. This presence that I desperately tried to escape. The who was always winning me over, though. And it was a who. It wasn't a what. It was a who. And my mind created many visualizations or conceptualizations of this other self that was continually invading upon myself, that was before there was any possible framework for a social connection of any sort. And I know this sounds confusing, because it's even confusing to me, but it's the basis of my experience. And as I grew up, I mean, the solitude that I discussed in my previous video really left me with no other option than to confront this other. And so when my grandfather began bringing me to church, I finally had a name to the face in my head. It just made perfect sense to me. And there's a couple of things beyond the mere logical consistency need that I have. There's a couple of things that you got to understand about me. And I think number one is I am a highly, highly intuitive individual. Not just because I'm a passionate person who goes with his feelings, but because my intuition pays off. When it comes to knowing people, understanding their reactions, and having insight into people, I've found that the vast majority of the time I'm spot on, with no good reason. People I've just met, people that I have no real good reason to know well. There's just intuitive processes that take place in my mind. I mean, you could call it subconscious cognizance, where my mind's just doing really complex equations itself and giving me the solutions. But I've found that the vast majority of people on the face of this earth are particularly predictable to me. It's not very often they surprise me. And it's a temptation to use that to my advantage, which I have done many times in the past, but I try to avoid these days. That's called manipulation, by the way. My buddy Drew Bowers posted a link about high EQs, emotional quotients, as opposed to intellectual quotients, and how they're good for some settings and bad for others. Well, let me tell you, I can very much identify with that. I have very high EQ, I'm very empathetic, and I can really see into people rather easily. And it doesn't stop as people. Animals, I've always been very good with animals. If Michelle was up, I'd call her to testify on my behalf. Those animals that nobody else can deal with, I just, I kind of get them, kind of get what they're going through. I feel what they're feeling, and I know I get an idea of how to approach them, or how I would want to be approached if I was in their shoes. And, it's like I've been like that. I've gotten dogs that people thought were too aggressive or uncontrollable, and it's easy as hell for me. I mean, it's just a matter of putting in that caring and that effort to try to understand the animal. And so when you begin to understand the way that I approach understanding things, I start with what I suspect. Because what I suspect is not a complete picture, but it is almost always touching upon something that is undeniably true, just slightly beyond my comprehension at the moment. So it always begins with a suspicion. It always begins with, it seems like this. And then I just talk it out in my head, well, if this, then that. And, I apply rules of logic and rationality to it. But it's really all about what I already know, but have become blind to seeing through the artificial experience of corporeality, if that's not too complicated. That's why I was saying earlier, it's more about remembering than it is about learning. And that's where I see intuition is playing a role. The problem arises with false memories, that things can seem one way, and because of our particular experiences, it can be colored and thus what starts in truth ends up in error. And that's something always to be guarded against. But I think, and this is going to lead me into that third thing. Now, first is the logic. Second is the intuition. The third, as I've come to know myself more, I understand how my ego can run away with itself and how I can begin to believe my own hype. And I've found that my times of greatest insight are at my times of greatest self-doubt. And that's why the third aspect of my epistemology is an intense self-skepticism. A skepticism that puts my own ideas through a greater rigor than anyone else's. A skepticism that no matter how strongly I may feel about something, I know beyond a shadow of a doubt, in some way I'm wrong about it. And so, much like Michelangelo said that he didn't carve things out of marble, the thing was already there. He was just removing the excess marble. Well, that's what that intense skepticism does for me. It removes the excess marble of my ideas that are not exactly part of what I really know, not exactly the core truth that I'm getting to, but something that was produced by the intersection of that truth and my experience that produced some kind of erroneous way of viewing what is very true. So with those three things, with the logic, the intuition, and the skepticism, that is the approach that I've taken to science, philosophy, and most importantly, religion. Now we go back to that other self that almost oppressing presence in my life that is not solicited nor welcome. All throughout my life, there's been this inner dialogue, this inner discourse with this other. And he's presented himself to me in many different ways at many different times through the confluence of events in my life, through the testimonies of others who have spoken to me, but most tangibly in the Bible. One of those principles that, people can argue against the perspicuity of Scripture all they want. I just really believe with all my heart that the sheep know the voice of their shepherd. And as I read those words of Scripture, I hear the voice of my shepherd. I hear him speaking to me, speaking things that the text says, speaking things that go beyond the text, where the text is just an entrance, and then he elaborates upon that. It's an odd form of communication to attempt to convey to someone who hasn't experienced it, because it's almost like God speaks to me through my own thoughts, though they're not really all my own thoughts. And I know that there's so many people out there who's going to say, well, this is just a creation of your own mind. This is just your delusion. My response to them is fair enough. I guess I can't really convince you otherwise. All I know is that I'm convinced otherwise. And this is in the face of my intense skepticism, primarily just because of the course of my life. Christ has interjected himself into my life in so many undeniable ways. I should have been dead so many times over. I should have been locked up so many times over. I shouldn't have the friends that I have. I shouldn't enjoy the comfort that I enjoy. Daily his mercies rain down upon me new. And daily the communication leads me in new and exciting places. And even in the face of my skepticism towards him, my dialogue with God includes a lot of doubt, includes a lot of questioning. It's just, he's never failed to answer me. It's really what it comes down to. He tells me what I need to know when I need to know it. And that doesn't mean I divorce my intellect from the common dialogue that we have, both on the show and in my personal life, even on Facebook. I do not divorce my intellect. But this is why I'm not comfortable. Every time people tell me you're not a fideist or fideist, however you say it, fideist, you're not that. I'm like, I'm not so sure I'm not. Because some things I just know. And I'm okay with that. And there's plenty of times where that knowledge is incomplete. And like I mentioned before, like there's aspects hoisted on top of that knowledge that aren't necessarily true, but are more of a product of the interface between that knowledge and my experience. Even in the face of that doesn't diminish that truth that is there, that truth that is independent from myself, that doesn't ask from my permission or affirmation, that truth that just is. And to deny that, to me, would be lunacy, because it's just that real. And I know some of you will think, oh, he's just trying to sound all esoteric and mysterious, and other people are going to say, oh, he's just putting a pretty face to a delusion, and yet other people will say it's just a meandering, nonsensical diatribe against common sense and reason. And all of that, my only response would be, I'm not called to be a salesman. I'm called to testify. And this is my testimony, and this is who I am. And if our intellects can coincide at some point, and that's great, we can share a discourse. But you got to understand, there are certain things that you're just not going to budge me on. It's just not going to happen. And it's not because I close my ears to the arguments. I mean, when it comes to arguing against Christ, I think at this point in my life, I've probably heard every possible argument that there is against Christ. So it's not like I'm going to hear anything new there. Just like I've heard just about every possible argument there can be against the existence of God. And that's not an audacious statement, because there's not really that many good ones out there anyway. There's some that kind of give you pause for thought, but for me, atheism it's people going about trying to prove an assumption, and which is actually, and I know it's not going to look this way, but it's actually the opposite of what I do. And I assume that I'm wrong, and I try to prove that I'm wrong. It seems like atheism is all about proving atheism, and it's, you torture the data enough and it'll confess to anything. I can thank Chuck Missler for that nugget of wisdom. So I guess I don't know what else to say other than I do believe that there is deep, deep truth in the pages of Scripture. And I've engaged in a lot of investigation about, the archaeology behind it, and the lineage of each textual family, both the general and higher textual criticism. Of course, I mentioned that book by James R. White, The King James Only Controversy. That's a great entrance into the whole topic. I've entertained a lot of different approaches to viewing Scripture, as far as the hermeneutic. I've read a lot of theories of the canon and all of that stuff, and I think really the facts do lie on the side of inerrancy. And I could be wrong about that, but one way or the other, I do think that it is beyond evident and very provable that Scripture itself finds its origins outside of this earthly sphere. The prophecy, the prediction, how things come together, the consistency of the message through such a vast period of time. I mean, I'm not gonna give you my scriptural apologetic here. All I'm saying is that I think that really the evidence does lie on the side of Scripture being exactly what modern day Protestantism says that it is. But I'm okay with having a slightly different view. I'm not entirely opposed to a new perspective on Paul. I just haven't heard one that really resonates with me yet. But I guess I'll have to make that bold statement that I accept the truth of Scripture because it bears itself out consistently in life and experience. It verifies itself through all of these intellectual means, the contextual criticisms and whatnot. It shows its power in the lives changed by reading the words of the book and how it revolutionizes a person's entire view of the world. But these three things, they're great for apologetics, but they don't do it for me. What matters to me is the voice of the shepherd, and I hear him there. That's where I hear it. And I hear him elsewhere as well. I hear him through my friends. I hear him in nature. I hear him through my own thoughts, through even the words of my children. But all of those are subjective. They're subject to interpretation. I think there's just a component of Scripture where you can only stretch interpretation so far, and there comes a point where the text says what it says, and you have to deal with that. You have to either deal with understanding it or undercutting it, I guess. So, and that's by no means a comprehensive outline of my entire epistemology. It is, however, I think sufficient for the purposes of this video, which is just to give you a few of my starting premises, a few of my axioms, a few of my biases, I guess, and how I address them and use them as a strength rather than weakness. So, yeah, I guess that'll do it for today. Thank you for joining me, and please, I will definitely answer any questions in the comments below, so please feel free to leave a comment. And if I know you by another name other than what you're commenting as, let me know what that is, because I don't know anybody's YouTube names. I know your Facebook names and some of your Google Plus names, but I don't know anybody's YouTube names, so it's always nice to know who's commenting if we do know each other outside of this. So thank you very much. God bless, and hope your day's as good as mine's going to be.